Vince Olson, head distiller at Widow Jane. Today we're going to talk about our flagship bourbon. This is our 8-year, our Widow Jane 8, as we like to call it. Widow Jane 8-year straight bourbon, I guess is the technical term. We take this particular bourbon out of each barrel one at a time and allow each barrel to really express the different characteristics. You know, some barrels can be maybe a little spicier, some barrels can be a little more mapley, a little more caramelly. It just depends from barrel to barrel, and it's really cool being able to do single barrel whiskey here in Red Hook. The grain bill on this is gonna have a good amount of rye in there. In order to be considered bourbon, it has to be at least 51% corn, but beyond that, you can add any ingredient you want to. For this, it's 75% corn, 21% rye, 4% malted barley. So with that 21% rye to back up that 75% corn, it really makes for a super rich, well-balanced bourbon. And it's gonna have a nice little bit of spice, rye spice in the middle that sort of carries you up. And then the softness from our mineral water and just in general, the richness from the barrel is gonna carry you through the finish. It's got a little bit of burn. It's at 91 proof, a little higher than a lot of other whiskeys on the market. You know, we still want you to remember you're drinking a bourbon, but it doesn't burn all the way. Just a tiny bit to remind you you're drinking a whiskey, and then it has a nice, smooth, clean finish. It's a really fantastic bourbon, and you know, using our own water from a mine that we own in upstate New York, doing it single barrel, really makes it our own. This particular bourbon has some great flavors of like vanilla, a little bit of like orange zest. You definitely get some char from the barrel. In fact, you know, we don't chill filter at all, so I don't know if you can see, but there's actually a little bit of sediment that'll typically be at the bottom of each one of our bottles if they sit on the shelf for a little while. That's just some char from the barrel. Once you flip the bottle, it dissipates. You know, so you can either have that mix in with a little bit with every glass, or you can wait till you get to the end of the bottle and get like a nice, really kind of more intense last glass on that bottle. So that's kind of a cool little note as well. Yeah, it's a fantastic bourbon. It sells for retail around $60, depending on where you're getting it. If you come here to the distillery, you probably get a little better price, but you know, either way, it's about 60 bucks no matter where. I definitely would recommend drinking any of our whiskeys here neat, or on the rocks. But if you're gonna mix this, and a lot of cocktail bars in New York City do, and across the country, mix this in, it's gonna be, I would recommend that you mix it into like a classic cocktail that really features the bourbon, like say a Manhattan, or an old fashioned, and you know, this particular bourbon does work awesome in a Manhattan, even though a lot of Manhattans these days are built around a rye whiskey, and traditionally were as well, but this being a high rye content bourbon really makes for a super nice Manhattan. It's one of my favorites, actually. To learn more about Widow Jane, please visit us at widowjane.com, and thanks for watching Cigar TV. Light it up.
It began with a battle, was blessed by a Baptist minister, and these days takes a blaze of flames to finish, and decades to perfect.
Well, bourbon is magic. The first one really makes me want to have the second one real bad. I just love the way it tastes.
Now maybe you think you know all you need to know about bourbon.
You get to a certain age, at least men, you don't shop anymore. So I wanted to know what bourbon I wanted when I went to the liquor store.
But the more you know about what goes into it, the more you're gonna get out of it. It's about the subtle differences that make one bottle a perfect mixer and another worth a king's ransom.
As a millionaire, that's probably what you'd be drinking.
Is the secret in the water? Could it be in the barrel? We're gonna tell you where to find the white dog and what the angel's share should be, plus when it's okay to add ice. From the bottom of the barrel to the facts behind the bottle, we're gonna show you how to choose the best bourbon and how the best is done. So much bourbon, so little time. Let's get started. But wait a second, what is bourbon?
All bourbon is whiskey, but not all whiskey is bourbon.
All whiskeys share the same 4 regulations. Whiskey is a spirit. It's distilled, crafted from grain. It is distilled below 190 proof. It is aged in an oak container, and it can be bottled at no less than 80 proof. Now, bourbon whiskey takes those 4 rules and really adds some teeth to them.
So here's what makes bourbon different from the other whiskeys. Number 1, bourbon is made with corn.
So you have the 51% corn minimum, and the second grain you have an option of using either wheat or rye. Also has to be aged at least 2 years in new charred oak barrels. Not a used barrel, but a new barrel.
We're the only whiskey in the world that doesn't allow for the addition of caramel coloring.
Bourbon has to be made in the United States. Now, it does not have to be made just in Kentucky. It can be made anywhere, but most of it is made in Kentucky today.
So that's the legal definition of America's native spirit. That's right. Congress declared it our official spirit in 1964. But it took a little bit of luck and a whole lot of magic to get to that point. And we promised you some fighting. So let's go back to bourbon's beginning. Farther. Farther. No, keep going. Okay, here we are. Way back when, whiskey was an important part of life on the farm. Good for whatever ails you. Not just a drink, but a frontier companion. Or maybe the antiseptic you used to swab out a scratch or a bullet hole. In 1794, a very young United States government levied a tax on distilled spirits. Frontier farmers used to converting their surplus grain into alcohol complained, and the people rose up. It began as a peaceful civil protest, but soon became an active resistance, including the tarring and feathering of at least one unfortunate tax collector. And eventually, it became an armed rebellion. The Whiskey Rebellion is generally considered to have been the first test of the fledgling country's new authority. Called upon to defend his shiny new Constitution, President George Washington sent in the militia. The handful of men arrested were later pardoned by Washington, who went on to become one of the biggest whiskey distillers in the country. By 1799, Washington's distillery was turning out some 11,000 gallons of whiskey per year. What the Whiskey Rebellion also did was drive some of the smaller distillers farther afield, out of the reach of the feds. The state of Kentucky offered settlers 400 acres of free land if they would build a cabin and grow some corn. And it worked.
We knew what to do with all the grain we had to grow to get the free land. And that was converted into something that was valuable and non-perishable, and that was whiskey.
In 1811, there were 2,000 farmers in Kentucky that were registered to have these 50-gallon or larger stills.
And here's where the magic began. It turned out that there was, well, something in the water.
Well, let me tell you what the magic is. It's where the limestone from the east meets the soil from the west that has no ferrous oxide in it.
It makes for good bourbon.
Which is the reason the distilleries are so close together.
You can get the corn from anywhere. You can get the wheat from anywhere. It's our limestone water that really makes the bourbon. It's high in calcium, low in iron. So that's why we have great racehorses and great bourbon.
But the whiskey hadn't become bourbon quite yet. It needed a little help. Let's just call it divine intervention.
Elijah Craig was a Baptist minister.
He was making whiskey, and at this point, he ended up putting it in barrels that were charred.
Originally, these barrels were fish barrels, so they burned them to get the fish smell and all that out.
You filled it up with straw, and you set fire to it. And this killed any bacteria, sanitized the barrel so you could use it for something else. So a charred barrel was not unusual, but putting the whiskey in a charred barrel is what made the difference in the taste.
The big market was New Orleans, which took about 3 months to get to on a flatbed barge.
And so they put the bourbon in thinking that when they got to New Orleans it was going to be a clear product just like it was when they put in.
And while it was in that barrel, it took on this great flavor.
During the time spent in the charred oak barrels, the whiskey turned red and flavorful.
They sent a message back and said, "What is this red liquid you sent us?" And then the next thing you know, people started to like it because of the flavor.
And they referred to it as, "Have you any of that whiskey from Bourbon?" Meaning Bourbon County.
So there you have it. Elijah Craig puts whiskey in a dirty old barrel from Bourbon County, Kentucky, and America's native spirit is born. Now keep in mind that back in the day, bourbon was not the same stuff we see today. It was called firewater for a reason.
It's nothing as smooth or as good as what we're doing today.
If Maker's Mark had been invented by my great-grandfather instead of my father, all his buddies who would have been distillers would have called it sissy whiskey. Because they weren't looking for smooth and refined, they were looking for something that helped them get through the day fighting Indians, and it was a pretty rough existence. And bourbon fit well into that environment, old bourbon.
But bourbon's roughest battle was yet to come. In 1920, the U.S. government banned the production and sale of all alcohol. Kentucky was devastated. Shutting down the liquor industry put thousands of distillery workers and barrel makers out of work.
It's the only time in our history we lost population. People had to move out to find work because many people worked in the industry.
In some cases, they wound up resorting to activities that were perhaps a trifle shady.
It made a lot of our legal, law-abiding citizens break the law. We have a local order of nuns, and the good sisters were so proud of the fact that they had a really good supporter who took them to Louisville in a car whenever they needed to go. Later they found out every time that he took a load of nuns, he unloaded his illegal whiskey and sold it to his contacts in Louisville.
But it wasn't all moonshine. Congress did leave one loophole.
They did declare that whiskey had a medicinal value, so they allowed 4 distilleries to remain open to distill medicinal whiskey. We were one of those 4 and the only one in Kentucky allowed to remain open during that period of time. If you went to a doctor during that period of time and he or she prescribed medicinal whiskey to help cure your illness, they would literally write you a prescription for up to 1 pint of 100 proof whiskey every 10 days. Fortunately for us, we had lots of people with lingering illnesses, so our doors have never been shut. We've always been open.
Prohibition was repealed in 1934, and bourbon came down from the hills. But the times, they were a-changing, and bourbon had to change with those times. Coming up, we'll show you how that happened, meet the tastemakers you need to know, and jump on the bourbon trail.
If you really want to know how the best bourbon's made, you have to come to Kentucky.
This is where you'll get the message straight from the horse's mouth.
When How the Best is Done returns. The law of physics says that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Maybe that's why the state that birthed bourbon was also home to its greatest opponent, the fiery leader of the anti-alcohol activists, Carrie Nation.
Carrie Nation was the best known leader in the temperance movement. She would pick up her hatchet and she would go in saloons and start breaking up stuff. She had the strength of her convictions, and Carrie had 2 husbands, both of whom were alcoholics. But nobody says whether they were drinkers before she married them or just after she married them.
Welcome back to How the Best is Done. Kentucky is known for beautiful things. Rolling hills, farms, stone fences, horses, and of course, bourbon. What would Kentucky be without bourbon?
Well, let's put it this way, it might be like Indiana.
Perish the thought. But thankfully, Kentucky is where 95% of all bourbon is made. That's why we've come here, to learn from the world's finest practitioners of the craft. And speaking of making it, it's time to go to the bottom of the barrel. The barrel is more than just a container. It's an essential part of the process. That's because alcohol goes into the container as whiskey, and it comes out bourbon. And the reason is the barrel.
We tend to think it's probably 70 to 85% of our bourbon's flavor is coming from the barrel since it's in there so long.
Come on, the next stop is Bluegrass Cooperage. About half of the world's bourbon barrels come out of its doors. Not surprisingly, It's located in Louisville, Kentucky. The cooperage is owned by the Brown-Forman Company, makers of Woodford Reserve and other spirits. The barrels made here are crafted for each of their specific brands. A surprising amount of work is done by hand. Barrels are made from American white oak, cut into staves, and assembled by the barrel raisers.
The barrel raisers are very skilled workers. They are taking these nice jointed and cut staves, and usually 33 staves at a time, they will form the body of the barrel. And they will alter a wide stave with a narrow stave, a wide stave with a narrow stave, so they can have a nice bend to the barrel. They have to work fast. When the cooperage is making 2,000 barrels a day and you have 5 barrel raisers, they're doing a lot of work.
So 2,000 barrels divided by 5 workers equals 400 barrels per person per day. The folks here at Bluegrass are exacting in their standards for every part of the barrel. The staves are steamed into the proper shape. Spools of soft iron are cut to form the hoops, which are riveted around the barrel. The coopers work with traditional methods to ensure quality. They've got their tricks too, like the beeswax used here to make the barrel head fit smoothly. But the real secret to the finished product is all in the char, the fire in the barrel. Burning the wood releases the flavors within.
When the barrel's been charred and it's just fresh off the heat, it reminds me of a toasted marshmallow. The oak itself breaks down into its natural sugar components, and those sugar components in turn caramelize. So there's a very fine layer we call the red layer of caramelized wood sugar under the char, and that's going to give us our big sweet aromatic notes, the butterscotch and maple syrup and chocolate and caramel notes.
There are 4 degrees of char, from light to dark.
Number 4 will be a heavy char. It's usually called an alligator char because it looks like an alligator handbag or an alligator shoe.
So, light char, light bourbon. Dark char, heavy taste.
If you want a very light-bodied bourbon, light color, not a lot of tannic notes, you would want a light char. If you want a real strong candy or caramel notes, you go for a number 4 char, and obviously anywhere in between, you will dial up the appropriate char level.
So what's the formula for a Woodford Reserve barrel?
Each of our toast and char designations is a proprietary secret.
That's how important the barrel char is. Even we couldn't get the secret formula. Since straight bourbon must age a minimum of 2 years, the container makes a huge difference even on the youngest of them. But it's not the only factor. These guys aren't throwing just anything in those barrels and hoping for the best. Since the days of Elijah Craig, recipes have been refined and retuned. Each of the tweaks and subtleties leads to what's known as a profile.
A bourbon profile is the complete product. It's the appearance, it's the aroma, the taste, and the aftertaste. The profile of Woodford Reserve is quite complex. It's a very dark, brownish orange bourbon whiskey, beautiful. It has a wonderful aroma that just doesn't rush out of the glass. It's like a fine red wine. It breathes, it begins to open up.
In the bourbon world, there's seemingly an infinite variety of profiles. There's no better showcase than a restaurant named, appropriately enough, Bourbon's Bistro.
We have every bourbon that we can get our hands on through our distributor. So we have about 135 bourbons right now. As far as I know, we have the most on any list in any restaurant or bar.
In the country.
In the country.
That we're aware of.
A lot of people come in and think bourbon's bourbon, and that's it. When we have 135 and each one is unique.
135, huh? Name them.
Oh, wow. That would be very, very difficult. Very, very
I can
difficult.
name overhand.
Yeah, I think so. The 2 main profiles is you're going to have a wheated bourbon that's going to be sweeter, and you're going to have a rye bourbon that's going to be hotter. So.
Almost compared to wheat bread and rye bread, where wheat bread is a little sweeter, easier on the palate, where rye bread has a little more bite to it.
John and Jason's bread comparison is an apt one, and it's one that Bill Samuels can personally attest to.
We came here in the early 1780s. We've owned and operated distilleries since that time, and I'm the 7th generation of my father's family to give it a try.
In the 1950s, in an attempt to reinvent his traditional bourbon, Bill Samuels' father went through lots of recipes.
Bourbon traditionally had a harshness to it that really made it unpopular except in the West. The West at that time was Kentucky. And he wanted to add refinement, he wanted to add smoothness without stripping the character. He wanted to create a bourbon that took the bitterness out. We resorted to the kitchen, not to make bourbon, but to make bread.
Why bread? Because of the grains, of course.
A lot of the same taste characteristics of the bread would in fact exist in the bourbon.
So Bill's mother baked using corn and rye and wheat, the traditional components of bourbon.
And she made, I don't know, 300 or 400 loaves of bread. That was her job. His job was to taste the bread and magically decide how that translated to what the whiskey formula needed to be. And in the end, it really resulted in taking out the rye and replacing it with red winter wheat. And it just made all difference in the world.
The new smoother, sweeter bourbon was called Maker's Mark.
Back in the late 50s when it was introduced, it was the bourbon for folks that didn't like bourbon.
Bill Sr. was so sure he had the right formula, he set the old one on fire.
He did it right here in this room, right where we're sitting, and he took his great-great-great-grandfather's bourbon recipe that we'd been using since the 1780s and wadded it up and put it in this little bucket, which has a small opening and a large belly, and put some more papers in and some lighter fluid and lit it on fire. And unfortunately, what he had there was really a rocket nozzle and not just a bucket. And my sister, unfortunately, happened to be looking in the bucket when this was going on, and it singed her hair and burned a hole in the ceiling of this room. Yeah, we didn't ask him to do anything complicated after that.
It's not unusual for recipes to be many decades old, but like Maker's Mark, many have been refined to fit the taste of a new generation. Who are the tastemakers? Every distillery has its own personal wizard, a combination gatekeeper and head chef, but they're officially called the Master Distillers. And when it comes down to it, they're the rock stars of the bourbon world. And don't they know it?
The Master Distiller is the luckiest person in the world.
He looks after the details of making good bourbon and aging good bourbon.
Choosing the grain recipe, getting the right yeast strain, getting the length of time for fermentation, how much sour and the sour mash to use.
It's a lot more complicated than people realize, so it really takes a long time to make the finished product. You have to be very busy, but you have to have a lot of patience. You're responsible for the quality, you're responsible for meeting specifications.
The Master Distiller gets to taste the whiskey.
The secret to it is working with someone who has preceded you.
For the most part, these recipes have been handed down since the 30s. So the main thing is to be consistent and to deliver quality.
And it's just not the product in the bottle. It's the passion for the people you work with. It's the passion for the history of your product, the passion for the distillery. You're the ultimate cheerleader for your product and for the industry.
The longer you're at it, the better you get at it. And I've been at it now 57 years, so it takes a while.
So what makes a master distiller different from you or me? How about a photographic nose?
You do develop a photo memory for aromas and flavors. The ability to nose the aroma, to taste the intricacies, to feel on your palate the product is of utmost importance. You have to be trained, you have to have the innate God-given ability to do that as well, but you also train as an athlete. You do it over and over again every day.
At last, an exercise program I can get behind. What else?
I tend to remember virtually everything I've tasted.
Everything? That's quite a memory, considering that a master distiller will sample every barrel he makes.
The mark of a good bourbon, one that's pleasing to the palate, smooth, has a good flavor, good aroma, and does not have any bite or after taste effects to it.
These master distillers are the ultimate connoisseurs, ambassadors, and scientists in the bourbon world. But it's hard to find anyone in Kentucky who doesn't invite you to share in the legend, lore, and flavor of the local liquor. Coming up, we take them up on their offer and follow the Bourbon Trail to see the inner workings of the 6-time Distillery of the Year. And we'll show you what you should really be tasting when you take a sip of some of Kentucky's finest, when How the Best is Done returns. We've learned that all bourbon is whiskey. So what else is whiskey besides bourbon? Scotch, Irish, Canadian, rye, and Tennessee whiskey. You know what's not bourbon? Jack Daniel's. That's a Tennessee whiskey. Close but not bourbon. Tennessee whiskey is charcoal filtered, an added step not allowed by the rules of bourbon. Welcome back to How the Best is Done. We've chatted with bourbon experts, learned about bourbon's history, and seen how the barrels are made. Now it's time to really get down and dirty. Let's hit the trail. The bourbon distiller's reliance on the unique Kentucky geology, that magical combination of limestone water and iron-free soil, doesn't just make for great spirits, it also makes for great tourism in the form of the Kentucky Bourbon Trail.
Trails in Kentucky go back to when Daniel Boone came over the Cumberland Gap, and he followed a buffalo trail. And the Bourbon Trail goes from distillery to distillery. So today you meander through Kentucky, following the Bourbon Trail, just like 200 years ago you would have meandered through Kentucky following the buffalo trails.
The Kentucky Bourbon Trail takes advantage of the relative closeness of the industry's main players. With the big makers within an hour or so from each other, the Bourbon Trail is the best place to learn about bourbon.
We're all part of it, and we are proud of our part of it, and we like to share it with other people.
To take advantage of some of that Kentucky hospitality, we grabbed a couple of bourbon fans and longtime friends. Meet Sledge and Stu, a couple of ex-Marines who love their bourbon.
I've just had this interest in how is it made, where does it come from. I want to know if I have good taste or bad taste. I want to know if what I like in bourbon is what is good about bourbon.
I like the versatility of bourbon. It can be a very bracing drink if you're out splitting wood in the cold. It can be a great comfort at the end of a busy or stressful day. It's something that I share with special people in special occasions in my life when I want everything to be the best and just the right thing. And so I want to know more about it so I know how to choose just the right thing. We need bigger glasses.
We're taking them with us behind the scenes to see how much they learn along the way. Don't worry, they're not driving. The best place to find out what goes into bourbon? A distillery, of course. But which one? Remember, once upon a time, the hills of Kentucky were dotted with thousands of stills. After Prohibition, legal distilleries took over the bourbon trade. Over time, they consolidated. And nowadays, the hundreds of brands of bourbon on the market are made by a handful of companies. And what bourbons they are. There's Jim Beam, the best-selling bourbon in the world. One of the oldest distilleries in the country was built by Elijah Pepper in 1812. Now it's the home of Woodford Reserve, the official bourbon of the Kentucky Derby. Maker's Mark Distillery in Loretto has been designated a National Historic Landmark. Their stills are made of gleaming copper. They only make one kind of bourbon. Of course, they make quite a bit of it, and every bottle is hand-dipped for its distinctive seal. We checked out a lot of places, but the place we chose to see how the best is done is in the town of Frankfort.
Welcome to Buffalo Trace Distillery.
Buffalo Trace is the oldest continuously operated bourbon distillery, period. It's won numerous awards for itself and its array of products.
We have 13 different bourbons, and we have 33 different expressions of the 13 different bourbons.
So their bourbon is good and they make a lot of it. 3.5 million gallons a year. We went inside to see how the process works.
You want to start with some good, clean, high-quality raw ingredients. Namely, for us, we make corn, rye, and malted barley.
Step 1, the mash. You make the cornmeal mash.
The way you make mash is you grind up a grain into a meal, like cornmeal, and you drop it into water, and then once you mix that together and heat it, that becomes a mash.
Step 2, yeast. Believe it or not, the yeast is one of the secret ingredients.
We have a yeast strain that we isolated in the 30s, and we actually have used that ever since. And we actually use the same yeast strain for all of our bourbons, and we guard that pretty closely. It's a very key ingredient.
These 92,000-gallon fermentation tanks are the largest in the world. Inside, the yeast goes to work, turning the sugar into alcohol.
This is called fermentation. It takes from 3 to 5 days, and there's nothing stirring the product, nothing stirring it, no air being blown in. That is actually the yeast working, consuming the sugars in the mash. They're doing all the activity that you see here.
The result of all that activity? Beer?
We call it beer because after it's fermented, it's about 7.5% alcohol. And once it becomes beer, then we send it to the still house and distill it. Distillation is a critical step in the production of the bourbon.
That's because distillation is how you get the alcohol out.
Behind me is the still, the bourbon still. It is a 40-foot tall, continuously operating still, meaning the mash enters the top, the mash dribbles down, the mash is met by live steam, which extracts the alcohol. They can run about 500 barrels in one 10-hour shift through that, and each barrel holds 53 gallons.
The leftover grains wind up as cattle feed. Don't worry, there's no cow tippling going on. At this point, all the alcohol's been separated out.
The first distillation is coming out here. It's about 120 proof. We call it White Dog. It is basically what in the eastern hills of Kentucky they call White Lightning.
White Lightning, also known as old-fashioned moonshine. The second distillation is even stronger, 130 proof.
We double distill all of our bourbon. It removes some of the impurities, it mellows it out a little bit, and it raises the proof just a tad.
From here, it moves to another building where it is cut to 125 proof and then put in the barrel to age. At this point, it's still corn whiskey. As soon as it hits the barrel, it's officially bourbon. But remember, it's the aging that turns the White Dog red and gives the bourbon its complex flavors. Each barrel holds about 53 gallons of bourbon. Once filled, they're sent over to the rick house, a warehouse where the aging begins. Like any warehouse, the inventory is cataloged and put in its proper place. Nothing is left to chance.
It makes a big difference where we put our product on the upper floors and lower floors.
Top floor is similar to an attic, so generally it's always really hot, drier, and so that creates a different style bourbon. It'll age a little faster, it'll be a little hotter. You want to put a younger bourbon at the top because it'll generally age a little faster.
So now we wait. For years, the barrels are exposed to the heat of Kentucky's summer and the cold of its winter. Quiet now. Do you hear breathing?
During the daytime, the temperature rises, pressure gets inside the barrel, and it pushes the whiskey deep into the wood. And by doing that, then overnight it cools and it sucks, it creates a vacuum and it's sucking air in and out. So that barrel is actually breathing over a period of years. If it lays there for 20 years, it's breathed for 20 years.
The barrel breath draws the alcohol in and out of the wood.
You are actually pulling your spices and stuff back out of the wood, and it creates a different taste.
At Buffalo Trace, bourbon is aged anywhere from 4 years up to 23 years for its most expensive brand. And this is one reason why premium bourbons cost so much. You're investing years in your final product. And every year you age a bourbon barrel, you must pay the angel's share.
When you fill a barrel, we put 53 gallons in the barrel, and it'll evaporate about 3% a year. And so that evaporation is what we call the angel share. You can smell it when you go into warehouses. But that also is a very important ingredient in the aging process, because when it evaporates, some of it also condenses back into the barrel. So you get this breathing effect in the barrel, and that extracts flavors from the woods.
In bourbon, it's all about the flavors. Each barrel ages differently, giving it a slightly altered flavor from its neighbor, or from any other barrel in the warehouse. These subtle differences in barrel flavors are captured to create premium bourbons. Small batch bourbons are made from a limited number of the better barrels. Buffalo Trace was the first distillery to make them commercially available.
For us, a small batch is 40 barrels or less. So what we do is we go out in the warehouse and we select barrels from floors that we know produce very good, high quality bourbon, and then we'll taste each of those barrels. And we'll pick 40 or less of those barrels to go into a small batch bourbon. We feel good about that product because we know each barrel is good, and we know it's a super high quality flavor at the end. So.
Even more exclusive, single barrel bourbons. Each bottling comes from a single barrel, such as Eagle Rare or Elmer T. Lee, one of only 3 bourbons named to honor a living distiller. Barrels are periodically tested to see how they are maturing. These 5 barrels of Eagle Rare are being tested to see which has the best taste. In a bourbon barrel, the cork is called a bung. The bung hole is what it plugs, and the tool to remove the bung, a bung jumper. The tool Obi is using to extract the sample is fittingly called a thief.
What he's doing is putting his thumb over the end of it and it catches the product inside.
Rodney and Leonard are comparing these 5 barrels of Eagle Rare. They were all made the same day and aged on the same floor of the warehouse.
One is going to be just a little bit better than the other. So between the two of us, we picked number 4 there.
I would go with number 4.
We decided to throw Sledge into the mix to see what he's learned so far.
This one was much lighter, I think. These two were the smoothest aftertaste, but I think I like this one the best.
All right. That's the number 4 is the one real mouthpiece.
So number 4 is the unanimous choice. It's ready for the next step.
Yeah.
I do think I need to taste these again.
Okay.
Once the barrels are ready, they're dumped. But unlike a Dear John letter on Valentine's Day, getting dumped here is a magical process. Magical because it gets us one step closer to the final product. We're going to keep following the premium single barrels here.
What I do is I'll dump the single barrels into a processing tank and I chill filter them.
Chill filtering removes extraneous fatty acids.
It has to be below 32 degrees to have the fatty acids swell to a point where they would get caught in the filters that we use.
And when I deem that they're clean, I'll pull them over to a finalling tank, bring them up to room temperature, and cut them to exactly the desired proof, whether it be 93, 90, 80, 107. And then from there, we'll put them up into a bottling tank
And every barrel I do, I take a set sample for the chemist in the lab to check, and then he'll give me the final okay that it's ready to bottle.
We would check it for strength. It has to meet the label strength that's on the container. It also has to meet turbidity or clarity of the product itself, standards that we have at Buffalo Trace, and it has to meet our taste comparison against our standards.
After it meets the scientific standard, every barrel goes through the most exacting test of all, the human palate.
If you could have a machine do it, I'm sure a lot of people would, but there is no such machine. It really is experience and the memory, the sensory memory, and he has that memory and that knowledge of what it should taste like and what it should smell like.
He is Elmer T. Lee, master distiller at Buffalo Trace since 1950, member of the Bourbon Hall of Fame. Now retired, he still comes in to taste the products of the premium barrels at this table, which has been used for this purpose since the 1930s.
They bring samples from individual barrels. They'll pour them into a sample glass here and reduce it in proof to 60 proof.
Bourbon is barreled at around 125 proof, but for testing, it's watered down to about half of that. The lower proof opens up the flavors. Too much alcohol content can numb the tongue and impair the important tasting process, and possibly your judgment.
Each item does have a standard established, and those that meet that standard are approved for bottling. Those that are not approved are simply turned sideways.
We rotate this table so that we can look at the samples and we're kind of lazy, sit in one spot. What I like to do is just go looking at each sample and compare it to the standard. And
this is the standard that I'm tasting. You smell it, get the aroma in your mind. Now, you remember what that tastes like. Now you're going to test each individual barrel to see if it meets that standard.
Yeah, you didn't think he was going to swallow all that, did you? Even at 60 proof, that is a powerful elixir.
It helps to swish the bourbon around in your mouth. Most of your taste buds are most active on the side of your tongue. It's mellow, it's mild, not too sweet, got a little spiciness to it, a little oakiness to it. Generally speaking, I can go through 12 or 15 samples and still feel confident that I'm giving each one of them a fair shake. And then I'll take a break and come back and do the rest of them.
Elmer is not the only taster. Every barrel must be unanimously approved by a panel of testers before it can be used.
Everybody's taste may be a little different. What I prefer might not be your preference, but we can guarantee that they're all good bourbons.
Who are we to argue with someone who has his face on a bottle? Speaking of which, this is the room where the super premium bourbons are bottled. Everything from the small batch bourbons to the single barrels.
Well, we do the Blantons, the Van Winkle, the Eagle Rare, Elmer T. Lee, the Buffalo Trace, of course. From dumping the barrel to putting it in the bottle, it all is one barrel at a time. Then you have small batch bourbons. Our Van Winkle are small batch. Those are typically done 4 or 5 barrels at a time and put in a processing tank, commingled and done, and then they're bottled.
How many bottles do you get out of a barrel? Turns out it depends on the age of the bourbon. Remember that Angel's share?
The older it gets, the less you get. I think the youngest we do in here is about 8 years old. And those usually are around 250 bottles to a barrel, something like that. The older it is, the less you get. Some barrels we get in, we might only have 5 gallons of whiskey at barrel proof.
The handmade component of the process continues. These labels are all handwritten by retired distillery workers with nice penmanship.
Each label is numbered, barrel, rick number, the warehouse, and the proof is on each one.
The finishing touch? The corks. On a Blanton's bottle, there are 8 variations of the horse and the rider on top. Next stop, if you're lucky, a liquor store near you. Coming up, how should you drink your bourbon? We go back to Bourbon's Bistro in Louisville and put Stu to the test.
That's the youngest. That's my final answer.
Okay. And we tell you which bourbon we think is the best of them all. When How the Best is Done continues. The current inventory of bourbon in all of Kentucky exceeds 4.5 million barrels. If you plan to visit the Bourbon Trail, you're gonna want to stop in Bardstown, Kentucky.
Bardstown is the bourbon capital of the world because the largest amount of bourbon produced in the world is produced around the city of Bardstown.
But Bardstown isn't just steeped in bourbon, it's also awash in history. What better place could there be for a whiskey museum? The Oscar Getz Museum started with one man's collection of antiques, documents, and memorabilia dating back to colonial times. Bardstown is also home to the annual Kentucky Bourbon Festival, which draws thousands of visitors. And the best place to stay? The historic Old Talbot Tavern, which boasts an extraordinary bourbon bar. But you'd better plan ahead. During the September Bourbon Festival, rooms at the tavern are booked up 2 years in advance. Welcome back to How the Best is Done. We've introduced you to the wide, wide world of bourbon. Now the question is, how do you introduce yourself? Turns out there are many ways. You can start from the beginning.
And that sugar is just now starting to be turned into alcohol, so it still had a sweet taste.
Sweet, yeah, I taste exactly that. Yeah.
You can drink it straight from the still. Of course, it might be a little strong. Or set the stage properly.
So I would recommend in a snifter glass in front of a fireplace.
Some people start with an unfair advantage.
So my first memory is sitting on Jim Beam's lap.
Others have to warm up to bourbon.
I probably was 11 or 12 when I first had a cap full of bourbon, bad blended whiskey my dad used to drink. I poured just enough of it into the cap of the bottle to taste it. It brought tears to my eyes.
You always remember your first time.
The first time I tried bourbon, I got lucky, I threw up, and I fell in love.
Okay then. But did you fall in love with the taste? We heard from the experts. Now, how does it taste to you?
I taste wood and I taste earth.
Just tastes like oaky goodness.
It sort of tastes brown, you know what I mean?
Almost like cotton candy kind of thing going on.
It's like a sweet brown.
It tastes old, which I like a book. Like I'm drinking a book.
Bourbon tastes like a long break from a horrible day.
Can there be a wrong way to drink bourbon? Like so many other things, the answer is no, and maybe.
As long as it's in glass, I think it's in pretty good shape.
Show me the wrong way.
Nah, we'd rather show you the right way. So try this.
This is a Glencairn glass, and it funnels all the aromas up to your nose. And you can really smell the vanillas and the caramel in it. But this is the way to drink. Drink it neat, maybe with a cube of ice, but in this.
There you go. Is that simple?
Doesn't get much better than that.
No.
It's a sentiment echoed by our master distillers. If you want to add ice or water, go right ahead. Lowering the proof makes it easier to savor the bourbon's taste. And you're not going to argue with a master distiller about that, are you?
When I make a drink at home, a little ice, a little water, get it down to about 60 proof is where I prefer it. Some people prefer it at bottle proof. Other people like the real strong stuff.
Some bourbons come from heavy charred barrels. They're very robust whiskeys. The more water, the more ice you put with them, the woodier they become. Some bourbons are really crafted for highballs. They're perfect with ginger ale and Coca-Cola, while others aren't. So you really need to know your brand to judge what you'll put with it.
Seriously, you do. Need to know your brand, that is.
I mean, if you're going to mix, don't spend $20, a $20 shot to put in Coke. You know, just don't do that.
We've actually had customers that, I think they ordered the 20 or the 23 year, which is about $35 shot, and they wanted, it was a 23 year in Coke. So our bartender put the Coke on the side.
He wouldn't do it.
He wouldn't do it.
He said,
so,
if you're going to spoil the bourbon, you have to do it.
You'll have to do it yourself, but I'm not doing it.
It's time to put our student to the test and see how much Stu has learned along the way. His task? To rank 3 bourbons by age and cost, from the youngest and cheapest to the oldest and most expensive.
It's going to be age and kind of price point too. So we're going to go lower end, more pedestrian, to higher end, and with that, the age will go with that. So,
while Stu gets to work on his final exam, we get 2 other tasting menus from the owners of Bourbon's Bistro. First, a starter course, one for a bourbon beginner.
I'll start with an 80 proof Basil Hayden. Then I'd move them to probably a Maker's Mark, which is around 90 proof, is that right? And then after that, Woodford Reserve. So that's a good 3 to start out with. And then after that, I'd probably move them to the 12-year Pappy.
Yeah, very good.
And then the 5th one would be William LaRue Weller, which is
that'd be
127 proof.
I'd probably throw in a Weller product, the Weller Centennial, which is one of my favorites. And then I would probably throw in Booker's, which is 126 proof, and that's going to give them a good kick.
Okay, that's a nice sampler. Here's a few others that consistently rate highly in contests and taste tests. Knob Creek, Eagle Rare, Evan Williams, Russell's Reserve, Elijah Craig, Booker's, Blanton's, Jefferson's Reserve.
Premium bourbon is the Van Winkle line. The 20 and 23 year, they're probably getting the top dollar for that. And retail.
$200 a bottle.
Yeah, so that's, as a millionaire, that's probably what you'd be drinking.
So come on, gun to your head, choose.
If I had to live with one bourbon?
Pappy 20. Pappy Van Winkle 20 year, that would be, you'd have to do that.
All right, I'll take the 15.
Made at the award-winning Buffalo Trace Distillery, the Pappy Van Winkle Family Reserve bourbons have won some significant honors themselves.
Yeah, we kind of hit pay dirt back in the early 90s when we got a very nice rating from the Beverage Tasting Institute in Chicago, which was the highest rating any whiskey ever got anywhere, Scotch or bourbon.
The Beverage Tasting Institute was founded to provide fair and impartial reviews of wine, beer, and spirits. They gave the Pappy Van Winkle 15-year-old Family Reserve a 98 out of a possible 100. Since then, they've racked up other honors, including double gold medals at the 2007 San Francisco World Spirits Competition. The Pappy Van Winkle Family Reserves are made with wheat as their secondary grain. They're aged for longer than any other bourbons on the market, 15, 20, or 23 years.
You taste a lot of the sweetness from the grains and also the sweetness from the wood, but once the whiskey is aged that long in the barrels, it picks up a lot of flavor from the barrel.
Hey, let's check in on Stu in that taste test.
This is more aromatic. I'm trying to clean out my tongue before I go to the next one. This is spicier. And yet this is not as aromatic as that one. And yet it's much darker. Now, from what I have learned these last few days, the older it gets, the more robust it gets, the more it absorbs from the barrel.
Correct.
So I would expect the oldest to be the richest in color and texture.
Potentially.
And exactly. That's the youngest. That's my final answer.
Okay.
I'm going to say this is the oldest because it seems to be the most, if this is the right way to speak of it, the most vibrant flavor. That it feels like the flavors are richer. I want to say it's almost more active.
Final answer?
Yes.
Very good. 3 for 3. Very good. You had Maker's Mark, which is about a 4-year-old bourbon. They don't age statement, but it's aged about 4 years. And then the 4 Rose Single Barrel, which I understand you just had
last
recently,
night,
which is very good. And I pick up a lot of cinnamon. So you talk about that spice. I pick up a lot of cinnamon there. And then the Pappy Van Winkle 23 year.
I just had some Pappy 23.
You just had some Pappy 23.
I am privileged.
Absolutely.
I am privileged.
But that's
Thank
great.
you.
3 for 3.
He liked it. He really, really liked it.
You could feel the spiciness, the flavor in your mouth. But this one, not only feel it, but it started dancing in my mouth.
Yeah.
You know, obviously that's not I'm trying to find the literal words,
exactly.
but that's what it felt like.
Yeah.
It just started running around and this is awesome stuff.
So if a bourbon can inspire poetry in an ex-Marine, it must be pretty good. And we agree. There are a lot of fine bourbons out there, and you can have a lot of fun figuring out which ones you like the best. Our pick for the best bourbon of them all is the Pappy Van Winkle Family Reserve, with 3 expressions, the 15, 20, and 23-year-old. There's one for just about any occasion. And now you know the best, and how the best is done. Happy bourbon trails to you. Wine, the drink of kings and gods, the subject of art and mythology. It's inspiring.
For me, it was something that I discovered when I was a kid, and I fell in love with it.
Wine is a subject of infinite possibility. It's of infinite interest.
It's a complex mix of 1,000 chemicals, yet at its essence is so simple.
Wine is about grapes. That's the main product.
There are good wines and bad. $5,000 bottles and $5 bottles. What makes one special and the other not?
What makes a great wine is one of the questions for the ages.
Is it the soil or the science, the grapes or the barrel?
Magic. Can we leave it at that?
Pharrell Williams here.
Hi, I'm Joy Bryant.
I'm Eric Ripper.
I'm Tom Colicchio.
I'm Dr. Frank Lipman, the host of On the Table.
The host of Across the Board.
Host of Artist Talk.
Host of Hooked Up.
Host of the show, Be Well Week, Be Well Weekend, on the Reserve channel.
It's only on Reserve.
Did you know that you can follow my show on social media sites like Facebook?
Follow us on Twitter.
If you're a fan of my show, hit the like button.
All of the above.
Share me with your friends.
Treat yourself. Check out a new episode of my show, Hooked Up.
And if you want to leave comments, feedbacks, ideas, whatever, love to hear from you. Leave a comment.
And if you don't want to miss the show, be sure to subscribe.
The one that's like down here, or is it here? Somewhere down here.
Thanks for watching the Reserve channel.
Only on YouTube. Throw caution to the wind and ask yourself what rules.
Hi, I'm Yakub Huda from Nat Sherman Cigars, lead sales associate at our flagship townhouse on 42nd Street and manager here at our Red Hook pop-up store. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the assorted gift sets we do. We're here at the Nat Sherman pop-up at the Widow Jane Distillery in Red Hook, Brooklyn, and let me walk you through some of our gift set stylings. Our first one here is our latest styling, which is the Epoca sampler. This gift set will contain 6 different sizes of the Epoca line, all 6 that are currently in production. It's a great way to introduce someone to this line or to provide someone who enjoys this line with a smoke for any type of occasion. The Knickerbocker on the large end for when they've got time to really sit down and enjoy a cigar, or the Brevis and the Admiral here on the shorter side for a quick after lunch or coffee break style of smoke. In terms of cost on this particular set, we're looking at around $77 here in New York City for all 6 cigars within the box. Our next line here is the Timeless Nicaraguan sampler. This will contain all 6 current production sizes on the Timeless Nicaragua blend, Timeless being our award-winning line from 2012 and 2013. It's been top 25 cigars of the year 2 years running now. The blend comes in 2 stylings, the Nicaraguan, which we'll see here, and the Dominican, which I'll talk about here in a second. So our Nicaraguan Timeless blend features all Nicaraguan tobacco. It's all lower priming tobacco, so forgoes the topmost leaves on the plant where we have a more aggressive strength profile, which leaves this blend in a more medium strength profile, but with a very hearty and rich, lively flavor that Nicaraguan tobacco is known for. Cost on this set will be roughly $60 here in New York City. Our next blend here is the Timeless 4 cigar assortment for when you want to get someone not quite as many cigars. This is the first 4 sizes that were in production on the Timeless Dominican line. Timeless Dominican is a blend of 6 different tobaccos here from 3 regions. So we're looking at Dominican and Nicaraguan on the fillers, a Dominican binder, and then a Honduran wrapper tobacco. So tremendous complexity here, medium in strength as well. We also have this Timeless assortment in a 6 cigar range, which contains all 6 current production sizes in the Timeless Dominican series. Cost here, we're looking at around $44 on the 4 cigar assortment and $60 on the 6 cigar. We also do samplers and gift sets that will be by size instead of just by blend. So we'll have that in 3 different varietals here. Our first is the Figurado assortment. Figurado refers to any of the cigars that aren't straight-sided, that'll have some sort of taper to them. So we have it represented here in 3 different of our blends, the Metropolitan and Metropolitan Maduro, which is part of our classic series, some of our oldest cigars in production, as well as the Timeless Dominican in both the number 2 torpedo shape, as well as the Divinos, which is a nice short perfecto. A great way on these samplers to see both our old age and classical styling of cigar blending, as well as our newer age styling of blending with the Timeless series. We'll have the same assortment of blends available in 2 other size varietals. This will be the Robusto assortment here, which will contain 6 cigars, but again, those same 3 blends. And then we'll also have the Churchill assortment, which will contain the same 3 blends again, but all in a Churchill size at 7x48 or 7x50. Cost on these are looking between around $40 and $55 as well here in New York City. If you'd like to learn more about our gift sets, please come visit us at the townhouse. Myself or one of the other tobacconists will be more than glad to guide you through our different options, as well as show you other add-ons that are fun with these, such as lighters, cutters, or ashtrays. To learn more about our Nat Sherman cigars, as well as all of these gift sets as well, please visit us at natsherman.com, or again, come see us at the townhouse. Thanks for watching Cigar TV. Light it up.
Awesome.
The great German car manufacturer BMW can trace its origins back into the last century. In the 1930s, it built some of the world's best sports and luxury cars. It recovered from destruction in World War II and financial reversal in the 50s. By the early 70s, it was once again a major factor in the world high-performance and luxury market. The name BMW Bavarian Motor Works was first registered in March 1916 by a company that manufactured aircraft engines. It would continue to manufacture them into the 1930s and make a major contribution to Adolf Hitler's development of superior military technology. The company's first major success was a Max Fritz-designed six-cylinder N-line engine that powered German fighters in World War I. German aces Ernst Udet and Manfred von Richthofen, the Red Baron, owed much of their success to BMW engines. After the war, the Treaty of Versailles banned the production of aircraft engines in Germany. BMW turned to agricultural machinery. But the genius of Max Fritz continued to make its mark. His six-cylinder BMW aircraft engine was part of a winning tradition. It also designed the engine that won the 1914 French Grand Prix for Mercedes. In 1919, his six-cylinder BMW aircraft engine powered a DFW biplane on an amazing flight which reached an altitude of 32,000 feet. Meanwhile, the BMW name had been sold to another company which intended to produce brakes for railway carriages. It was bought back by one of BMW's original investors, and in 1923, the reconstituted BMW released the revolutionary R32 motorbike. The R32's twin-cylinder engine was designed by Max Fritz. Power was transferred to the rear wheel by a shaft rather than a chain. The R32 set the pattern for the classic BMW motorbike. In 1924, BMW entered the R32 in competition. Success was immediate. BMW wanted to produce its own cars, but it did not want to rival the large Daimler-Benzes of the time and decided on something small. The Eisenach-Dixie Company was producing a German version of the popular British Austin 7 under license. BMW decided to take over the Eisenach-Dixie Company. It raised the money, and in late 1928, the little 315 Dixie, with its tiny 750cc engine and 47 miles an hour top speed, became BMW's first car. BMW had been in debt before raising money for the Dixie takeover. The Dixie Company itself had hidden debts. But sales of the tiny Dixie were good. In Britain, the low price of the Austin 7 had brought car ownership within reach of a new part of the market. In Germany, the Dixie did the same thing. And it was just the car for the Depression. It sold in thousands. The Dixie was very basic transportation, but it gave BMW a start in the world of four wheels. Many Dixie owners tuned their tiny cars for competition on the racetrack. Competition successes in the humble Dixie foreshadowed BMW's distinguished record in motorsport. The Allies dropped the ban on German aircraft engines in 1922, and 10 years later, BMW engines powered a Dornier flying boat on a record-breaking round-the-world flight. BMW had moved into car manufacture and was once again building aircraft engines, but it had not forgotten motorbikes. The R2 motorbike continued the BMW pattern of horizontally opposed twin engines and shaft drive. But a new factor was about to affect BMW's fortunes. By the time Hitler came to power in 1933, BMW had withdrawn from the agreement with the British Austin Company to produce the German version of the Austin 7. It had attempted, without great success, to produce a small car of its own design. But it had also developed a six-cylinder engine, and in the first year of the Nazi regime, introduced its 303 sedan. Hitler was more interested in aircraft than cars, and BMW's successful aircraft engines attracted his support. BMW radial engines powered the successful Junkers Ju-52 transport aircraft. BMW cars were manufactured at Eisenach. Aircraft engines were built at Munich. The staff of the Munich factory increased from 2,800 in 1932 to 12,500 in 1934. Cars were not as politically important as aircraft engines, but development of BMW automobile technology was rapid. BMW's first sports car, the 315-1, had the six-cylinder of the sedans, fitted with 3 Solex carburetors. Its elegant styling underlined BMW's seriousness about performance. BMW guaranteed that this car could exceed 75 miles an hour. The 315 two-seater was built in 1935 and 1936. Only 242 were produced, but they set the pattern for the great BMW cars that were to follow. Not all BMWs were elegant sports machines. The 319 sedan, produced between 1935 and 1937, was a practical family car. But BMW was moving toward the top end of the market. This is the handsome 326 Cabriolet of 1936. The classic body styling of the 326 made it the major attraction of the 1936 Berlin Motor Show. It was not intended to be a sports car. It was designed to appeal to Mercedes customers. It was the most successful BMW of the 30s, and a total of almost 16,000 were sold between 1936 and 1941. The 326 offered its buyers hydraulic brakes, torsion bar rear suspension, newly designed independent front suspension, and a strong box frame, which replaced the previous BMW sedan chassis. It was available in open and closed versions and had an excellent top speed of around 70 miles an hour. BMW was not slow to use the reputation of their successful aircraft engines to promote their cars.
Von der unbedingten Zuverlässigkeit der Motoren hängt die Sicherheit des Fluges ab. Es sind BMW-Motoren. Die große Erfahrung der bayerischen Motorenwerke kommt auch den Motoren der BMW-Kraftwagen zugute.
Hochwertig, sicher und zuverlässig. Das sind die Merkmale des BMW-Motors.
So ist der BMW-Wagen zum klassischen Fahrzeug geworden.
Auf endloser Straße.
Im pfadlosen Gelände. Bei sportlichem Einsatz. Und im täglichen Gebrauch. Immer und überall versehen BMW-Wagen mit vorbildlicher
In the late
Zuverlässigkeit.
30s, a confusing variety of engine and body combinations was available to the market.
Ist Selbstverständlichkeit.
The 320 and later 321 were both shorter and lighter two-door versions of the 326. But they were different from each other. All were beautifully finished, well-engineered cars.
Im BMW fahren Sie bequem.
But while BMW was achieving success with its family and luxury range, it had developed a new model that would become the greatest BMW classic of the 30s.
BMW.
When the 328 was released in 1936, its impact on the sporting car public was immense. Its styling was a development of the 315-1 sports car. It was powered by the BMW 2-liter engine, fitted with a high-performance aluminum cylinder head. You could buy the 328 with a choice of gearboxes for the road or for competition, and there was also a choice of knockoff or bolted wheels. Top speed was close to 90 miles an hour. The light tubular chassis allowed suspension to be relatively soft, and yet still give excellent handling. For the remainder of the 30s, the BMW 328 was a benchmark in sports car design. In post-war years, it became a classic, sought after by collectors and classic car racers. For many BMW enthusiasts, it remains the high point of the company's history. Elegant styling was a feature of the whole range of late 30s cars. The 327 was among the best-looking of all the BMWs. It was a two-door sports version of the earlier 326. The 327 was released in 1937. This is actually a 327-28, a high-performance version with a 2-liter engine of the 328 sports car. By the late 30s, BMWs were strongly identified with the affluent end of Nazi German lifestyle. As well as engine options, the 327 offered the possibility of specialist coach work. If you wanted it, you could order one of many coach-built bodies in coupe or cabriolet style. There were many detailed differences between models. The 321's doors were hinged at the back, like its larger cousin, the 326. The 327, on the other hand, had doors hinged at the front. Almost every taste could be satisfied by the BMW range, as long as you had the money. But while BMW continued to pour out its beautifully designed and engineered cars, the industrial might of Germany was being harnessed to build the instruments of war. Companies like BMW were an essential component of Germany's plan to arm itself better than any potential enemy. By 1939, BMW was working on a wide variety of high-tech military projects, including the development of jet and rocket engines for aircraft. But steel from the German furnaces was still available for car manufacture, and BMW had one last pre-war design to come, the last of its classic line of 30s cars. The 335 was released in 1938. It had a 3.5-liter engine and was a luxurious successor to the 326. It remained in production until 1941 and became a great favorite of high-ranking military officers. It was not a car for the masses. Just over 400 were built. The declaration of war in 1939 was the beginning of the end for BMW, as it had developed over its first decade as a car manufacturer. BMW cars continued to be built, but the design and development resources of the company were diverted to the war effort. The level of manpower controlled by BMW expanded enormously. Much of this increase came from prison and concentration camps. The company's expertise in aircraft engine production became a major factor in the Luftwaffe's technical superiority. The great Focke-Wulf 190 fighter was one of many German aircraft powered by BMW. Success attracted the attention of the Allies. BMW's Munich factory was bombed around the clock. In one day in July 1944, almost 12,000 bombs hit one BMW factory. When the war ended, the damaged Munich factory began again from scratch, producing pots and pans made from scrap aluminum. BMW went back to its origins, the motorbike, and by 1948 was ready to release its first post-war road machine, the R24. The original BMW car factory at Eisenach was now out of reach in Soviet East Germany, and it would be 10 years from the end of the war until BMW was allowed to rebuild their aircraft engine plant. In the meantime, BMW motorbikes became the mainstay of the company's return. They were successful on the road and on the racetrack. The Deutsche Bank arranged the financing necessary to bring BMW back to life. There was no sign of a new car yet, but the R24 motorbike proved to be a winner. The R24 was followed by the R51. Like the R24, it was a direct descendant of the original BMW motorbike. They shared the basic BMW characteristics, a twin-cylinder horizontally opposed engine and shaft drive. After the devastation of the war, resuming the production of BMW motorbikes had been difficult enough, but picking up the evolutionary threads of BMW cars would be much harder. A decade and a way of life had passed since the BMW 328 dominated the sports car world, but its technology was still usable, and several German enthusiasts set about building their own cars using the 328 as a basis. Among them was Ernst Loof. In the late 40s, Loof developed a highly sophisticated series of sports cars around BMW 328 components. He called his range of cars BMW Veritas. The Veritas cars were built for both the racetrack and the road. They were extremely successful in German road racing in the late 40s and early 50s, and evoked strong memories of the great pre-war sporting tradition established by BMW. The surviving Veritas cars are now great collectibles. Ernst Loof, their designer, returned to work for BMW in the 50s to help re-establish the car-making side of the company. But by the beginning of the 50s, the first BMW post-war car was still 2 years away, and the main production output of the factory continued to be motorbikes. Initially, motorbikes and sidecars were just right for an economy in which few could afford cars, even if they were available. BMW motorbikes appeal strongly to young Germans trying to rebuild their lives after the war. Motorbike and sidecar combinations also had the advantage of providing spectacular racing for a public hungry for distraction and amusement. While BMW continued to dominate post-war German motorbike racing, argument continued inside the company about what kind of car to produce. It did not seem logical simply to pick up the pieces that had been dropped in 1941. Conditions had changed too much. A small car prototype, a step up from the motorbike and sidecar idea, was built but rejected. Directors favored a car that would measure up to BMW's pre-war luxury reputation. It was a strange commercial decision, given the economic reality of the time. The market for such a car had virtually disappeared. The BMW factory in Munich was still largely a motorbike production facility. When a prototype for the new luxury car was shown in April 1951, there was really no means of mass producing it. BMW made a momentous decision. The company would invest all its available capital in building its own pressed steel stamping plant, which would take several years to complete. A new facility was developed incorporating modern post-war work practices and technology. While the plant and all its support systems were being built, bodies for the new car would be contracted out to the coachwork company Bauer in Stuttgart. It was a grand idea, even though the new car was in fact little more than a revision of the pre-war 326. Progress was slow. 18 months would pass between the showing of the prototype and the delivery of the first cars from the factory. There was no question of producing a new engine. Old technology would have to be adapted. The new luxury car would be heavy, almost 3,000 pounds, but BMW had to use the pre-war 2-liter 6-cylinder engine to power it. The factory was equipped to produce motorbike engines. Tooling up to produce an old car engine would be a major expense. For now, a new engine was impossible. With only 65 horsepower available for such a heavy body, no one expected performance to be outstanding. But BMW saw the old engine as only a short-term solution. Engineers were designing a 3.2-liter V8 with a power output double that of the old 6. The major investment in new plant, equipment, and personnel was a risky move. If the decision to build a luxury car was wrong, the company faced the possibility of financial ruin. The post-war German economic miracle was beginning, but for BMW workers, there was a chance it could be over very quickly. The new BMW luxury car was called the 501. It entered production in October 1952. The body had generous flowing lines. Its many compound curves would eventually be pressed out of sheet steel in the BMW factory. But for a while, all the bodies would come from the Bauer coachworks. The price tag of the new car would be high. It was set at 15,000 Deutschmarks, 50 times the monthly wage of the workers building it. Many Germans didn't like the Baroque Angel, as it was nicknamed. They called it fat and said it looked too much like the contemporary British Austin designs. They were also critical of BMW for putting a weak, elderly engine into such a bulky car. In spite of all the early criticism, the BMW buying public liked the 501. Cars trickled out of the factory. In 1952, only 50 were delivered, but production gradually increased, and eventually the 501 sold well. The 501 was underpowered, but it wasn't slow. It had a top speed of 85 miles an hour. Acceleration was another matter. It took over half a minute to reach 60. A series of engine improvements was made through the production life of the car. It was given a 12-volt electrical system, a dual downdraft Solex carburetor, and a new camshaft were added. A new ZF gearbox was installed. Top speed was increased, but reliability reduced. BMW's already stretched financial situation was stretched even further by the number of repairs it had to make to these cars under guarantee. The real revolution occurred when the V8 engine at last became available, and the 501 model was replaced by the 502. The long-awaited new engine was Germany's first high-volume alloy V8. Initially, it produced 95 horsepower, but output was increased throughout its life. This is a 1954 502. It was a beautifully made luxury car with top speed now approaching 100 miles an hour, and finally, acceleration to match. Sales began to increase, and in 1955, BMW launched two new cars that had the potential to elevate the company to its pre-war status. The sporty 503 signaled a return to high-performance cars in the tradition of the 315 and 328. It had a top speed of 118 miles an hour, but was not a big seller. Neither was the 507, but it was by far the most desirable car that BMW had produced since the 30s. BMW's gamble in producing low-volume luxury cars was not paying off, and motorbike sales, which had kept the company going, were dropping as the population became more affluent. People who owned neither motorbike nor car relied on public transport. As the German economic miracle developed and disposable incomes grew, buying a car became more than a dream for a larger and larger section of the population. But for most buyers, a small, cheap car was the only realistic, if uncomfortable, possibility.
Klappt es, fährt los, doch fühlt schmerzhaft jeden Stoß.
In 1955, BMW went right to the opposite extreme from its luxury V8s and offered the buying public just about the smallest car possible. No more problems finding parking spaces, and no more damage trying to fit into one that was too small for the car.
Dreht und windet, sie nirgends Platz zum Parken findet.
In the new BMW, parking was as simple as it can get.
Mit diesem Fahrzeug ohne Tücke vertrauen Sie in der kleinsten Lücke.
Ein schöner Traum, nicht wahr?
The Isetta, as it was called, belonged to a class known in the 50s as the bubble car. It was designed by an Italian refrigerator manufacturer, Renzo Rivolta, and BMW was one of several companies that built it under license. It really could be driven straight into a tiny parking space, and many who could only afford to look at the luxury V8s could actually buy an Isetta. BMW sold 160,000 of them. Later models had a 600cc BMW motorbike engine. Ironically, this strange little car helped BMW survive. It provided the volume sales the company needed to build its new sporty 700 series.
Der Wagen mit Profil, BMW LS Luxus.
Groß, großartig zu fahren, größter Komfort.
The 700 was released in 1959 and remained in production in several different versions until 1965.
Luxus, der Wagen mit Profil.
Its 700cc motorbike engine was only slightly larger than that of the 600 bubble car, but it looked like a real car and found a steady stream of buyers. In standard form, the 700's engine produced 30 horsepower. Sports versions were tuned to give 10 more, and in a small light body, performance was surprisingly good. A few mid-engined competition roadsters were even included among the various forms of the 700, and they competed with success in a class of racing where the competition could be, to say the least, intense. The 700 was a very important BMW. Although it didn't make a fortune for the company, it paid its way. BMW researchers identified the need for a slightly larger car to fill the gap between the 700 and the luxury tours. But the company's planners argued about just what kind of car they should build. In the meantime, the company nearly went broke. In 1959, large BMW stockholders pressed for the acceptance of a low-priced Daimler-Benz takeover bid. But BMW dealerships and the smaller shareholders resisted. Financiers Herbert and Harold Quandt acquired a large parcel of stock. Herbert Quandt pressed for the production of a car aimed at Germany's growing middle class. The success of the 700 bought time to allow the company to set up for the production of that new car. If it hadn't been for the cheeky little 700, there might well be no BMW today. The company could not have held out against the takeover threats, nor could it have afforded the tooling to develop the new mid-range car that would form the basis of BMW's next generation. It was essential to BMW that the new car, the 1500, be ready for release at the Frankfurt Motor Show in the autumn of 1961. It was not yet ready for production, but BMW felt that it had to be shown to interest potential customers. The 1500cc four-cylinder engine was well developed, but there was conflict between the development engineers and the sales department about the look of the new car. The sales department prevailed. The Italian stylist Michelotti was asked to incorporate the traditional BMW kidney-shaped grille into the new front bodywork. The chassis, bodywork, and running gear were developed in haste, but the 1500 made the deadline. It was a great success at the show. Thousands were ordered, but there were problems in getting it into immediate mass production. A preliminary series was produced in February 1962, but full production didn't begin until October. Only 2,000 were built in the year, against 20,000 orders placed by the end of 1961. The 1500 was a new beginning for BMW. It was known within the company as the New Series, or New Range. It offered very sporty road performance and was a natural for competition. Another major feature of the 1500 was that it removed BMW, for the time being, from head-on competition with Mercedes. The 1500 engine set the pattern for the modern BMW. It was designed for high-speed cruising. It could run at speeds approaching 100 miles an hour on the autobahns, and only cost half as much as the 502 V8s. Its clean styling and excellent road manners hit the middle-class market niche dead center. At last, 17 years after World War II, this was the car that would save the company. As the 1500 success continued, BMW began to drop its older and less profitable models. The little Isetta was dispensed with in 1962. The 501 and 502 V8s went out of production in 1963. The four-cylinder 1500 engine was designed to accept high-performance tuning. It was also designed to be stretchable. It was planned that after the initial market period of the 1500, the engine would be enlarged to 1.8 and then 2 liters. The 1.8-liter version, called the 1800, was introduced in 1963. Externally, only a chrome strip and a badge gave away the difference. BMW's sports-minded engineers had more in store. At the same time, the high-performance TI for Touring International was introduced with high compression, an extra carburetor, and various other performance options. And there was much more to come. Over the next 10 years, until the early 1970s, many different versions of this basic line of cars would be offered to satisfy all tastes in BMW's new sector of the market. One of the most important variations from the basic model was the two-door line of cars. This is an 1802 from 1971. The two-door cars were substantially lighter than their four-door counterparts, and they made a great impact on buyers interested in high performance. Development continued. The 2000 range, with a 2-liter version of the 4-cylinder engine, came into the market in 1966. The new BMWs changed the traditional notion of a sports car. They were engineered to outperform most of the 2-seater roadsters of the 60s, and yet they looked like normal sedans. Eventually, the 2000 became available in a fuel-injected version, the TII, released in 1969. It had a top speed of 115 miles an hour. The two-door 2002 came out in 1968. Road testers raved about it, and it quickly became a cult item. The great American dealer in European cars, Max Hoffman, championed BMW for a long time, and the two-door cars vindicated his faith in BMW's American potential. But the American versions of the 2002 lacked the punch of their less regulated European counterparts. While the line of cars that saved BMW had 4-cylinder engines, the company's tradition of 6 cylinders, dating back to the 30s, was not forgotten. Motorcycle production continued, but cars were now dominant, and among the new products of BMW's rapidly developing technology was a new line of 6-cylinder cars, the BMW 2500s. The 4-cylinder cars had started with the 1500 engine, which was designed to be easily expanded to larger capacities. The same principle was adopted for the 6-cylinder cars. Increasing demand led to a period of change and expansion. New factories were taken over and renovated. Motorcycle production was moved to Berlin. The company, almost bankrupt less than 10 years ago, was rapidly expanding. The 6-cylinder cars were offered in 4-door sedan and 2-door coupe form. The 2.8 and 3-liter coupes are among BMW's most handsome cars of the 70s. The 6-cylinder sedans and coupes expanded the market reach of BMW. Their introduction meant that once again, BMW was competing with its old rival, Mercedes. As the wealth of the German middle class increased, BMW pitched its cars to a widening economic spectrum. By the time the 3-liter CSI was introduced in 1971, the company was once again setting out to appeal to the top end of the market. The elegant 3-liter CSI once again positioned BMW in the market sector they had occupied so successfully in the 30s, with cars like the 327. The CSI had a 6-cylinder engine. It had high performance and a price tag to match. BMW had come full circle since World War II. The company had risen from the ashes of the war and endured a period of uncertainty and adversity. With success had come an opportunity to return to the old principles of excellence and high performance. In the early 70s, BMW began to build a new office block in Munich, symbolizing its return to a dominant position in the German motor industry. The building was designed to utilize high-technology construction methods. It was built in the shape of 4 cylinders. In 1972, with BMW developing its 3rd generation of post-war cars, the building was completed. From its position of prosperity in the early 70s, BMW could look back over the brilliant cars that saved the company, the great misguided cars that nearly ruined it, and beyond the devastation of the war, to the elegant coupes and roadsters that had set a standard for excellence in the 30s. From the 315, BMW's first sports car, and the little Austin 7-based Dixie that began it all, BMW had come a long way.
Hello, my name is Diana. We're at the Botanical Bar associated with the Widow Jane Distillery, and we're going to make our paddle boat drink that has the Widow Jane bourbon in it. So first you start off, you have to always ice the cup down so it has a nice cold chill on it. And then what you're going to do is you take 1.5 ounces of the Widow Jane bourbon. Next is 1/2 ounce of orange juice. All our juices that we use are fresh squeezed every day, daily. So 1/2 ounce of orange juice. Then you use 1/2 ounce of framboise, which is a raspberry liqueur. And then the final ingredient is 1/2 ounce of creme de cacao, to give it a nice chocolatey flavor to help balance the bourbon. Let's fill it with some ice. And then just give it a good shake. Sure you shake out the cup, and then just strain over the martini glass. And to go with the raspberry, just tap it with a pretty little raspberry on top. And that is the Widow Jane paddle boat. To learn more about Widow Jane products, go to widowjane.com. Thank you for watching Cigar TV. Light it up.
The La Herencia Cubana Oscuro Fuerte and Toro. Hi, I'm Brian Glenn with cigarobsession.com. Tonight we're taking a look at the 6.5 by 50 stick. Coming in with a very dark chocolate wrapper with a firm pack. Soft, oily, slightly toothy feel. Minimal veins, tight and visible seams. Nice looking triple cap. And a very pungent hay and nut aroma. Very nice smell. All right, let's go ahead and get it cut up and start toasting. Right away, a very soft, mild to medium smoke, quite sweet. It's a sweet earthiness, very syrupy here on the finish. It's a natural sweetness, so no kind of artificial cherry or anything like that. Just a natural glycerin. Now some pepper and spice coming in through the finish. It's getting a little bit deeper, leaving an earthy aftertaste with a nice cayenne zing kicking up. Very interesting. All right, good start. I'll let it heat up, get in the first third, and see how it develops. "10 minutes in, just about an inch down, a little bit of a wavy burn. So far so good though. Flavor is up, body is at a solid medium right now, and all the different flavors have really come together, both on the draw and the finish. They're both about the same. I'm getting a nice cream, that natural sweetness. It's still a smooth, earthy core. It's on the lighter side, not quite a leather. Bit of a cocoa joining in, and still the pepper and spice. Not quite as intense as it was at the first light, but it does build through the finish. I got a little zing going on my tongue, a little bit of a cayenne heat. It's not a big powerhouse or anything like that though. Just lets you know there's a little something there. Very nice, complex blend, keeps me interested. So we'll see what happens as I keep going and hit the halfway point. Hopefully it gets a little more interesting. Who knows? Just over 30 minutes in at the halfway point here. Very good construction. I did have to give it one pretty good touch up about 1.5 inches in. Just started to go a little wavy and starting to tunnel, so I just caught it up. It's been fine ever since. Ash fell on its own this last time. Still a nice solid medium body. The only difference is the cayenne, that spicy component's completely gone. Everything else is there, and the earthiness has taken really the forefront. It's deeper now. It's leaving a deeper aftertaste through the finish. Very creamy on the draw. Sweetness is dying down, but it's still there just on the draw. Finish is just building up. You still get the pepper layering on top of that earth, so it's a very satisfying type aftertaste. Draw is absolutely flawless. Good burn down at this point, and a decent burn time. I'll keep going. We'll see what else happens as I go through the last third. "55 minutes in, down to the last inch or so here at the nub. It's going warm, so this is where I'll end it. Excellent construction. The ash just dropped off again on its own. Just about a razor sharp burn here at the end. Nothing but that one touch up near the beginning needed all the way down. Excellent flavors, still pushing medium body. Strength has come up though. It's not overwhelming. It's matching the body at a strength, giving me a slight little buzz, but nothing more. Very good blend between the nicotine and the flavors. The flavors have shifted just a little bit again. Still a creamy earth core. The sweetness is back though on the draw, but it's not that general glycerin type sweetness it had at the beginning. It's taken on a bit of a dry cherry note. It is fleeting, goes away very quickly, and then through the finish, there's no sweetness. It's just the oily, deeper earthiness, a little bit of a pepper, but no spice. So quite enjoyable flavors, very potent, easy to pull out of it, and of course, excellent construction. Thank you very much to Mike Boucher for sending this in for review. I greatly appreciate it, brother. This has been the La Herencia Cubana Oscuro Fuerte in Toro. I'm Brian Glenn of cigartvfeed4.com. Don't forget to subscribe, give me a thumbs up, and we'll see you next time.